Court. Good morning and welcome. My name is Marc Blatstein, the physician owner of Physician Presentence Report Service, and my good friend Ray Shoulders, who has gone through trial, went to be sentenced, and really has done everything that I recommended or asked him to do. And so his outcome is much better than it would have been, and potentially could even get better. So what I'd like is for Ray to introduce himself and give some background and how it came to me and the preparation that went into this outcome. It means preparing for the pre-sentence interview. Right.
Yes. So my name's Ray Shoulders. I was convicted in a jury trial on 13 counts, one count of conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud, and then 12 additional counts of healthcare fraud. My journey in with the DOJ and now into the BOP started July of 2023. I was indicted, and at that point, I felt I was going to go to trial because I was indicted as a lone conspirator in a conspiracy. And so I didn't spend a lot of time prepping. It wasn't until I went to trial and I got convicted that my mother-in-law and my father-in-law were very concerned. This was uncharted waters. Even for the lawyers, they're used to getting the defendant from the conviction to the sentencing, but they have usually after the trial, they're off to the next case. So for me, after the sentencing, I had a lot of apathy. I had a lot of disinterest just in doing things. I was literally probably headed down making the same mistake everybody else makes after their conviction or their plea deal, and just sitting at my house on my butt, not exercising, drinking, beer, eating Hot Pockets, playing video games. But once my parents connected me and my wife, or my wife and I, with Dr. Marc, as we call him at the house, things began to change. You know, my wife and I had talked to some other people, and it wasn't about the money. It was about the hand holding. There's a lot of hand holding that you provided us. But when we met with you that first day, you started honing in on topics that were being overlooked or washed over. For example, the health issue. We all have this grandiose idea that our current health is going to be accurately, correctly, and continually managed at the BOP. That's not the case. What I'm doing right now to maintain my health is probably not going to carry over to the BOP. But in getting ready for that, immediately after the trial, after when you have that conviction, there's a lot of things you need to do to start lining up your health care, or else you'll get in the BOP and you'll try to get your health care managed, and it's just not going to happen. So I'll touch on that here shortly. One of the biggest things is when we thought we were just getting a lot of hand holding, this relationship became more of a mentorship. And part of that mentorship develops really well during the narrative process. Now, I know there's a lot of debate about a narrative. I always say this: the narrative is good for you to start unpacking the pain, unpacking the issues, but it's great for the courts because they get to see who you are. And I took the narrative very seriously. I went all the way back to when I was 3, and we were homeless. We were living in a storage unit, and I put that in the narrative. And then I worked with my lawyer, and I have a great lawyer. He's very receptive to these things. He's on the forefront of things like using a narrative for the pre-sentence report, and also the giving the narrative to the judge. So my lawyer was also looking at my narrative. He was also learning who I was. He was also saying, wow, I didn't know like about the homelessness. Well, when he met me, I just looked like a gem. And so now he's like, well, you were really a diamond in the rough. And those are important nuances because your probationer, she's going to want to know, did you have a rough life, or was everything handed to you? And my lawyer, he took it a step further, and he had my narrative hand delivered to the judge's chambers as well as uploaded on Pacer.
So go into the narrative. How did that develop, and what points do you feel are important for someone else to hear?
So for the narrative, I really used that opportunity while I was in isolation to just dig deep into how my life had unfolded and ultimately how it led, up to the trial. And it took a lot of time, mostly because I was writing it, and then my lawyer would review it, and then I would give it to you. And this is where I say I'm lucky. I have one of the best. Everybody has a great lawyer, but I literally have the best lawyer in the nation. He's the president of the NADCL, National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. Like, this is like, there's no vote. I have the best. He's the president, and he would look at my narrative, and he would ask questions to help tease out different aspects of the story, because what he wants to do is humanize me to the probation officer and to the judge. And he, being a former AUSA, knows what human traits people want to see. They want to know about your kids. They want to know about ailments. They want to know about if your kids have disabilities. And so it took it. I had 5 weeks to prepare for my pro PSR. I used every bit of those 5 weeks working with him, working with yourself to get that PSR ready, and it paid off, because when I got my PSR, now legal side alone, I got a substantial amount of enhancements for going to trial and fighting it out. But in terms of quality of content, I started laying those breadcrumbs for health issues to get ready for things like compassionate release and second look at, just by having my EKG was part of the PSR. My EKG shows where I had a heart attack at 28, my cholesterol records and the diagnosis of familial hypercholesteremia, those are all part of the PSR. My doctor's notes are part of the PSR. So at this point,
More specifically, the medication.
Yeah, and
the
then
judge acknowledging.
Yes, and then the medication, and so that made it into the PSR, which is a win, because the PSR is the gift that keeps giving. It's gonna follow. It's gonna follow everybody. It's gonna follow me to the BOP. And the BOP, they're gonna say, if it's not in here, it didn't happen. If it's in here, then it's as good as gold. And so, because I had that PSR and I had all that information in the PSR, when it came to sentencing, well, this is where I always think of the judge is going to follow the law. He's going to go in there, and if your guideline is 120 to 150, that's the law. And we want to give him a reason to go below the law. We want to give him a reason to downward variance. And I think we have to play this, right? Do you want a downward variance or do you a downward departure? For me, I was really putting all my eggs in a downward variance, because a downward departure, that means that there's some type of 5K1 involved. There's some Rule 30. Rule 35 would be post-sentencing, but there's some type of cooperation involved. And I just went to trial. Those things would erode the narrative that we had painted and laid out. But suffice to say, when I got to my sentencing, the judge wrote in his order specifically, okay, I'm ordering this medication. He needs this medication to help manage his heart disease. That's all I needed him to say, because now I have it in the PSR. I have it in the orders. The judge has acknowledged this life-saving medicine in his order. And it's not like it's in there saying like, oh, he just needs this willy-nilly medicine. Like, no, he needs it for his heart condition. And then previous to that, in the narrative, I talk about the heart condition. The PSR talks about the heart condition. When my mother got up and did, I like to call it her character witness allocution, she talked about my heart condition. So by the time it got to me in that judge's report, he had a succinct understanding. Okay, there's a heart condition in this 37-year-old African-American male that's been well managed, but it could be completely derailed without, proper treatment.
The judge acknowledged that the Federal Bureau of Prisons is not going to provide it.
He acknowledged that he can tell them as much as he wants, but they're going to be their own entity.
And so with that going into prison, I'm jumping ahead, that almost opens the door for compassionate release through second look act if your health care deteriorates.
It does. And certainly I'm not going to go into incarceration with just let my health deteriorate. No, I don't want to come out in a pine box, but I definitely don't want to come out having a stroke or another heart attack. So I'm going to do what I have to do to make sure I stay heart healthy, whether that's eating oatmeal Cheerios but I'm going to do the things to the extent that I can, where the medicine is going to be critical for managing the stuff that I can't. Because I literally have a genetic condition, and this medicine operates on a DNA level. So it's like genetic condition meet genetic medicine. Everything's great.
How did you first learn about the narrative at all?
I thought when my in-laws were looking around for, somebody to help, they had mentioned about this narrative, and I started looking up about what the narrative was and how in detailed it was. And through a lot of consultations and just searching, I had people send me books that they had written about. They took their narrative, turned it into a book, and then they sent me their book. They actually sent me their narrative and said their narrative was the blueprint for their book. And I was a little overwhelmed because it seemed like everybody was saying write a narrative, but everybody was trying to monetize the narrative, so I didn't have a good idea. And luckily, you were just as open as my lawyer, because we had a lot of post-trial nuances that we had to navigate in terms of we didn't want to put in a narrative something that would hang me at sentencing. Whereas I had a different appreciation for you and my lawyer to be able to mold and meld, because we want to say a lot of things, but we also know that there are certain topics that we talk about would get me absolutely hung.
So diving into the narrative, you did, as I started with, you did everything I asked. And a lot of that you had done throughout your life. It was either contributing to society, volunteering, it was working, it was all of a sudden learning that you're a superb writer. And so all of that segue into bringing that into your narrative, because as you meet with the probation officer who does your pre-sentence interview, they have the ear of the judge. And so go through all of that information, everything in your background, to kind of tie it together so that people know that having a narrative or being comprehensively prepared for the pre-sentence interview is critical.
Yes. So for me, I started backwards, and I said to myself, I want to be at my sentencing, and I want to look back at the last whatever time frame it was. For me, it ended up being about 5.5 months until I got sentenced. But I wanted to look back at those 5.5 months and say, I not only did I not lose who I was, but I found a part of me, or as my wife would say, the physician assistant I used to be was only a mask, and once that was ripped away, my ability to write, to narrate, to storytell, to public speak, those were the real gifts that have been hiding away. So I sat down and I looked at the sentencing, and I looked at the allocution, and I said, what do I want to say, what do I want to show, and
What is
what
the
can
allocution?
so the allocution for me was the only time I was going to talk to a federal government employee, which was going to be the judge. And I tell people I'm a believer in the Fifth Amendment. So when agents came to my house, I respectfully I pleaded the Fifth. I wanted to have legal counsel present, and throughout my indictment and subsequent investigation, I always maintained the Fifth. The Miranda warning is very true. What you say can and will be used against you, but big exception, your allocution, that conversation with the judge, that's important. And conversation can change people. That's the one. Anyway, I say all that. I knew that was going to be the one time I had a conversation with somebody in an enforcement position about the case. So I looked back from my sentencing to where I was, in January, February, and I said, what do I want to do other than, this being apathetic, sitting at my house with my thumb up my butt? And that's where you came in. You said, well, look, why don't you write your narrative? So I started writing my narrative. I started having fun writing my narrative. I had a lot of fun unpacking it.
Narrative's kind of like your autobiography.
It is exactly my autobiography. And it was great because, I'm 37, and almost, 33% of my life has been spent with my wife. And so it was fun because there was a point in my narrative where I'm writing this with her, and we're getting to revisit those memories. We're getting to have some nostalgia, and a lot of those things made it into the narrative. And then there were just other things like, okay, doing community service. Well, my wife and I were very service oriented, and I didn't just want to stop. And it worked out that I was able to continue doing community service. My wife and I would do community service together, Meals on Wheels, Under the Bridge Ministry. That's where we go down and we feed the homeless, and we still do those things today. And I'll do those things up until I walk into the BOP. And as soon as I walk out of the BOP, one of the first things I'll do is go back to doing community service. But those were things that my lawyer, his advice was, look, go home, spend time with your family. That's the same advice they all give. Go home, be with your family. Your advice was, you can be home with your family, but what does it cost to take an hour out of your day, 2 hours out of your week to go and volunteer? That made sense to me. So, and then go ahead.
Well, you were also working, and it wasn't
So,
just one job, it was multiple.
and so that was another thing. I was just not going to work. And my wife was very content for us to just live off our little emergency nest egg. But my lawyer had said, hey, you don't have to work. You're going to have some issues with employment. And I did. I interviewed almost 100. Not interviewed, I applied to over 100 jobs I think I went to 2 to 3 interviews a day for 2 weeks solid before I was able to get a job. I was working at Lowe's, and then I got approved to drive for Lyft. So I was driving Lyft from 2:30 a.m. to about 9 a.m. Then I'd switch off Lyft. I'd go do Meals on Wheels, and then I'd go home, exercise, go back out, do Lyft, and then my shift for Lowe's would start. So then I'd do my shift for Lowe's, and it wasn't like that every day. There were some days where I didn't have to be at Lowe's, so I'd go drive for Lyft, and I'd go home, and I'd be a family man the rest of the day. But the gist is, I was working 2 jobs, and my lawyer, his jaw dropped. He was like, "Hey man, let me see those calluses on your hands." I was like, I don't know if I'm built for all of this, but it also helped with the probation officer. I have, everybody's gonna have 2. You're gonna have the one that comes to your house and the one that does the report. Well, the one that does the report, she was semi-impressed. She was like, "Well, that's cool. Like you come from high income, physician assistant, cush job. You're out."
You weren't born in the high income.
No, no, no. I was homeless. I've been homeless twice. I've not seen poverty. I've lived poverty. So I tell people, for me to go back to working 2 jobs, that's something I've done before and it didn't phase me. But for the probation officer, particularly the one that comes to the house, that really impressed her. And you have to keep in mind, like, she's also submitting a report. She responds directly to the judge. So what she sees, he sees. And I know this because I looked at her section of the report. Less is more. She was like, his house is clean. He's a cool dude. He's not going anywhere because he's got his kids. And, I drove up to Lowe's and he was sweating his butt off at Lowe's. And she was happy with that. And the judge, he's seen it. He was like, "Wow, man, you're working two types of employment." And those are the things that, I wouldn't have normally done without it was your mentorship that pushed me to do it. And then my lawyer, Mike was like, "Yeah, let's do it. Like, this is the way, this is the future. We want to see humble white collar defendants."
But you also delved into seeking therapy, if you will, for financial issues
That's right. So I also
without being
joined,
told.
yeah. So I'd been wanting to join Debtors Anonymous, and I actually joined Debtors Anonymous, and it turned out to be life saving. It helped with a lot of consumption issues that society has placed on us. Like, we're in America. We are a high consumption society. Most kids nowadays are born believing that debt is just a normal process of life. And Debtors Anonymous really helped me with my relationship with finances, and just being around people in a recovery setting. Really, there are just certain steps that you do in a recovery setting that help you, whether you have financial issues, drug, alcohol issues, gambling issues. And I just found it very beneficial to be in that environment. And that was something else that they found very impressive, is, okay, he's in this recovery group, getting help, has a sponsor and all those things associated.
So tie all this together as you've prepared your narrative. You've looked back at growing up through your youth to where it brought you through to today, the amount of work that you've done on your own, the therapy issues that you've addressed, your conversation or your interview with the probation officer that creates the pre-sentence report. How did all of that prepare you for the actual day of sentencing, your allocution with the judge or your conversation with the judge, and the outcome of your sentence?
So once we got to the PSR and certain critical information, namely the health, was put in the PSR, this allowed my lawyer to craft a more individualized sentencing memorandum. This was something I was warned about, that a lot of people have boilerplate sentencing memorandums. My client's a good person, but please go easy on them. Here's a statute. There's a statute for downward variance based on family community ties, which I actually got. Like, I got a downward variance for family community ties. But because I had that narrative, because I had all that for my lawyer to pick and choose from, he was able, in my sentencing memorandum, to show the judge, okay, like, here's the guy. Here's what he's been through. Look at this hard stuff, right? And it's great because in the sentencing memorandum, that's from my guy. That's from my team. So people are always dubious about your sentencing memorandum. But when my sentencing memorandum is referencing the PSR, well, it's not so dubious, because once it's in the PSR, it's as good as gold. And so that's all my lawyer did, was he took a lot of things in his sentencing memorandum and referenced it back to the PSR. And so when we got to sentencing, this is where I tell you, I have a great lawyer, and he knows that trial is a theater. And so my lawyer went in and he put on a production. It felt like sentencing was supposed to take 15 minutes, and mine was an hour and a half. And the whole time it was heartstrings pulled, there was crying, there was laughter. And when I got there, I was facing 109 to 134 months of incarceration. And I received a downward variance, not a departure, a downward variance of 25 months. So I received 84 months, which for me, that was like a whew, because once you get into FSA and it's not 84 months isn't as bad as a number as 109. That's 109, 134. Those are some rough numbers. And this isn't nobody's playing the game about doing hard time. Everybody wants the next person to do less time. So for me, when the judge told me 84 months, my wife was crying with relief. I was crying with I wasn't crying with relief. I was getting ready for the next part. I didn't really have a good cry till I got home, because my lawyer had told me, he said, hey, this could go sideways. You have 13 charges. You could be convicted. The judge could say that each charge is its own individual crime, not to be served concomitantly, but to be served consecutively. And he might give you a year on each charge, but you've got 13 charges. And I was like, oh, as you learn the law, you're like, that could hurt. And I also see the silver lining. But the judge,
you took the extra step.
Yeah,
without knowing, you actually wrote a book, a children's book, which was essentially your conversation with your daughter, but you put it into print that the judge was able to see.
Yeah, so that's part of the production is
but it's not judge, a production. This is real.
Well, yeah. So when I say so one of the things that you had told us, and then Mike had said, is that the judge is going to see 20, 30 people every 15 minutes, and he's probably just going to be looking at the guidelines saying, here's the law, here's the law, here's the law, and there's got to be something that makes you stick out. And for me, I had wrote my daughter a book trying to explain to her that just because we're not together doesn't mean we're not together in heart, and that there are plenty of people who are together physically, but they're separated in heart. And I also needed to explain to her that she still has the concept, bad people go to prison. And I tried to explain to her from a biblical perspective, the Apostle Paul. Well, Paul's a predicate felon, but explaining to her what predicate felon is kind of difficult. And then you try to explain to her, well, Daniel, he was incarcerated multiple times, and Joseph, and these are all great people. We name our children after Daniel, Joseph, and Paul, and it didn't resonate. So I had to figure out a way to tell my daughter on her level in my own way. And I turned that conversation into a children's book. And then I sent it to my lawyer I told him, I said, hey, I wrote this. It helped me talk to my daughter, and I want to put it into service. Please give to any of your clients who are similarly situated for free. And he wrote me back, and he's like, Crystal and I are crying, and this is great. Why did you do this? And I told him. And so I had went and printed a copy, but unbeknownst to me, he had actually printed copies. And when I got into the sentencing, my wife started talking about the book. But when I got up there to talk about the book, my lawyer, he held up the book, and he said, Judge, he said, if it pleases the courts, what convicted man writes a book to explain to his daughter? And you could just see the court reporter was tearing up. And so he walks the book up with permission, and he gives it to the judge. And the judge he stops the sentencing, and he's flipping through he's reading it, like he's internalizing it. And you could see something change in him. And it was changed for the better. It was almost as if he had that reason for the downward variance. And I know there are some people out there saying, man, you still got 84 months. I'm in the Northern District of Texas. Like, it is the hardest, most intense district when it comes to indictments, healthcare fraud, and sentencing. Like, it's just the toughest. And so I think of all the things that you and I did, and with Mike's backing, and it was all done from a sincere place. It wasn't, we didn't do any of this stuff to impress the judge, but we definitely did our best to show the judge and the courts our best face. And in the end, I don't want to say it paid off. In the end, we got to show him in our 15-minute block that took an hour and a half who we were. And I always tell people, like, that could have been done in 15 minutes. We could have went in there and the courts could have said, hey, it's 15 minutes. I'm not convinced. Gone. But we were allowed the entire hour and a half to put on our best face. And that's why I say, like, it was great getting that hand holding. I know there's a lot of people saying you're rolling the dice and you're gambling a bit, but you're doing the things, doing it from a genuine, sincere place. That's what I learned. And I think it was a great mentorship, more so than another with other individuals where it felt more like a business transaction, and they were just copying, stamping out, copy, stamping out. This felt individualized. Everybody else I had talked to felt more boilerplate.
So quickly, so now it comes down to the point where you've asked the judge for specific placement, and in order to have a placement request, there needs to be reasons.
That's correct.
And
they
all of a
asked.
sudden, what happened? What you do?
So we went in there with 3 objectives. We wanted mercy on the sentencing. Check, forgot that. We wanted a favorable placement at a camp close to my house, and then we wanted him to order the medicine. So we had already got 2, but it came down to the placement. And so I had asked for Texarkana, which is a camp. It's about 3 hours from here, but it's in a great place. It's very accessible for my wife. And the judge, the court said, "Hey man, like, why do you want to go there? We could send you right around the corner." Well, right around the corner is a federal medical center. And I was, even my lawyer was like, no. You don't want to go there. And my lawyer's like, well, wouldn't that be better with the health stuff? And I was like, no. Going there, I'm still not going to get my health stuff addressed there. Might as well go over here where they've got these programs. And I had highlighted the programs.
What did you have to highlight?
I had highlighted. So for me, I had highlighted automotive technician and automotive.
We gave you a packet.
Oh yeah. So you had provided me with a very extensive packet. It was 96 pages. I went down to FedEx. I printed 2 copies. I had one, and then as soon as the judge asked, "Why do you want to go here?" I held up his copy, and it was highlighted. And I had the most important stuff on top for him to review. But I was also knowledgeable, like, hey, here are the programs at this place that won't be at this other place, and I was able to explain to him, why this place had more programming compared to another. And it just worked well. It took maybe 30 seconds for him to say, "Okay, I agree."
Well, Ray, I have to say that I thank you very much and for being willing to have this conversation. And I hope that people who listen to this take away parts of it that are applicable to them. What can you recommend very quickly? Because
I would say I enjoyed the mentorship and being working with you and being pushed to individualize myself in the DOJ and the federal court system. I would tell people, just because you look and you see all these amazing, I was facing 20 years, I got 18 months, I was facing 30 to life, I got 56 years. Those are so rare. They are so uncommon. Don't chase those and miss the fact that you can still get reasonably below whatever your guideline is by some good hand holding and some good mitigation, even if your lawyer doesn't want to listen. There's still things you can do and will have to do that your lawyer won't be there for. And I found a lot of those things working with you in terms of getting ready.
And let me close saying that even if your lawyer doesn't want you to have a narrative, you still want to be able to impress upon the attorney the importance of that so that it can be included in the pre-sentence report. And that to me is a very big thing. And I think it pays off here. It was part of the pre-sentence report.
There are some people whose narrative, it only serves as something they give to the probation officer in advance. And that goes a long way because they're overworked and all they do is copy, paste. So it just works well.
I thank you for taking your time today.
Oh yeah, my pleasure.
Speak with me, and we will be talking shortly.
All right, appreciate you.
All right, have a good day. Soon.